The sun melted slowly into the horizon, painting the plains golden red when she arrived. A dusty wagon creaked its way toward the ranch house, her silhouette framed against the burning sky. The woman stepped down carefully, her dress catching the evening breeze, and in her arms, a small leather satchel and a book pressed close to her chest, the only possessions she carried. Her name was Clara Dane, a schoolteacher from the East, traveling west to escape whispers that followed her since her husband's death and the doctor's cold words that had shattered her heart. "You'll never have children." The ranch she'd been hired to work for was owned by Jacob Holt, a rugged cowboy widower with eyes as deep as the Texas night sky and a reputation for being as tough as the land he tamed. Everyone in town said Jacob had changed after his wife died 2 winters ago, leaving him with 4 restless children and a heart turned to stone. Clara had heard the stories, yet something about the quiet strength in his voice when he answered her letter made her believe there was still warmth left in him, buried, maybe, but alive. When she reached the porch, Jacob stood waiting, arms crossed, hat shading his face. Behind him 4 pairs of curious eyes peeked from the doorway. 2 boys, 2 girls, their faces smudged with dust and innocence. Clara felt her throat tighten. She had spent her whole life dreaming of a home full of laughter and little footsteps. But fate had denied her that joy. Still, as she looked at those children, something inside her stirred, a tenderness she thought she'd buried forever. Jacob's voice broke the silence. "You must be Miss Dane." "Yes, sir," she said softly, holding his gaze. "I came as you asked. I'm here to teach your children." He nodded slowly, studying her like a man who didn't trust easily. "You'll find 'em a handful. They don't take to strangers much." "I don't either," she replied gently, a small smile curving her lips. "But we'll get used to each other." His lips twitched, the faintest ghost of a smile. "We'll see about that." That night, as Clara unpacked her few belongings in the small guest room, she heard the wind whisper through the prairie grass and the laughter of the children echo faintly outside. It was a lonely sound, but not empty. There was life in it, mischief and the promise of something new. She stood by the window, watching the last glow of sunset fade, and whispered a prayer. "Please, let me belong somewhere again." Over the next few weeks, Clara worked harder than she ever had. She taught the children to read, to count, and to dream, not just from books, but from life. She took them down by the creek to catch minnows, helped them write letters to their late mother, and told stories under the starlit sky until their eyelids drooped and they leaned against her shoulder, trusting her without question. Slowly, the walls of the house and the man who built them began to soften. Jacob watched her from afar, pretending to stay busy with his ranch work. But every time he saw her laugh with his children, something heavy inside him cracked a little more. He'd told himself for years that love was a weakness, that caring for anyone again would only bring pain. But Clara's gentleness, her quiet strength, and the light she brought into his children's eyes, it pulled him back from the darkness he'd been living in. One evening, as the sky burned crimson again, Jacob found her sitting on the porch with the youngest girl asleep in her lap. He leaned against the post, arms crossed. "You're doing good with them," he said quietly. Clara looked up, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "They make it easy." He hesitated before speaking again. "You ever have kids of your own?" She froze. The question hit like a whip crack. She looked away toward the fading sun and whispered, "No." "I can't." The silence that followed was thick, painful. She waited for pity, for awkwardness, but instead she heard a soft chuckle. When she turned, Jacob was smiling, a real warm smile that reached his eyes. "Good," he said simply. "I've got enough kids for both of us." She blinked, startled. For the first time in years, her heart skipped with something other than sorrow. He tipped his hat and nodded toward the fields. "Come on, supper's getting cold." "And Miss Dane?" He paused, meeting her gaze. "You belong here more than you know." As they walked back toward the warm glow of the house, hand brushing hand in the dimming light, Clara realized the world hadn't taken her dream. It had just been waiting for her to find it in a different way. Winter came early that year, and with it came change. Clara had been with the Holts for nearly 6 months now, and the small ranch that once echoed with grief now rang with laughter, stories, and the creak of a rocking chair on the porch as Jacob and Clara watched the children chase snowflakes across the yard. Every morning began the same way: coffee brewing, boots by the door, and Jacob's voice rumbling low as he told the children their chores. But somewhere between sunrise and sunset, the rhythm of the ranch began to feel less like work and more like family. Clara would help the youngest tie her braids, bandage scraped knees, and read stories by the fire when the cold winds howled through the night. Jacob, meanwhile, found himself drawn to the schoolteacher more with each passing day. It wasn't just her beauty or her kindness. It was the way she looked at his children like they were her own, the way she carried sorrow but never let it break her. He often caught himself standing at the barn door, watching her teach, and thinking that maybe, just maybe, God had given him a second chance. But not all stories unfold without pain. One stormy evening, Jacob's eldest son, Tommy, fell ill with fever. Clara stayed by his bedside for 2 sleepless nights, cooling his brow, whispering prayers, refusing to leave his side even when her hands trembled with exhaustion. When Tommy finally opened his eyes and smiled weakly at her, she wept, and in that moment, the walls she'd built around her heart finally came crashing down. Jacob found her crying quietly on the porch afterward. He took her hand in his rough, calloused one. "You've done more for this family than I ever could have asked, Clara." She shook her head. "You don't understand, Jacob. I thought I had nothing left to give." "No husband, no children, nothing." He lifted her chin, his voice steady. "You've given these kids a mother's love. You've given me peace. That's everything." The wind carried his words into the night like a promise. And for the first time since his wife's passing, Jacob leaned in and kissed her, soft, hesitant, but full of truth. Months later, when the spring thaw came and the ranch bloomed green again, the townsfolk gathered for a small wedding under the cottonwood trees. Jacob stood tall in his best vest, his children fidgeting proudly by his side, and Clara, radiant in a simple ivory dress, walked toward him with tears in her eyes. When the preacher asked if he'd take her as his wife, Jacob looked at the children and smiled. "We already have." The crowd laughed, and even Clara joined in, her heart bursting with joy. Afterward, as the sun dipped low over the horizon once more, Clara stood on the same porch where she'd once arrived as a stranger. The children clung to her skirts, Jacob's arm wrapped around her shoulders. She looked at the land stretching endlessly before them and whispered, "I never thought I'd find home again." Jacob kissed her temple and murmured, "Home ain't a place. Clara, it's the people who need you." The children laughed and chased each other into the golden fields, their laughter echoing like music. Clara smiled through tears. She had no children of her own, but her heart was full, overflowing. She had found love, family, and purpose, not by blood, but by bond. And as the sun disappeared behind the distant hills, the ranch lights flickered to life, warm and steady, like a beacon in the wide, wild west. Jacob took her hand once more and whispered with a grin, "Guess I was right after all. I've got enough kids for both of us." Clara laughed softly, leaning into him, "And I've got enough love for all of you." The wind rustled through the fields, carrying with it the sound of belonging, the kind of sound that makes even the loneliest heart believe again.